Hiya, I'm Judy Waite and welcome to this session as part of this symposium. My session is called Creativity, the Cutting Edge, which has got a focus on creativity and creative process and how we might evolve and measure creative process in terms of assessments and ultimate impact in higher education. And if that doesn't do it for you, let me just tell you that part of the session is going to involve the humble paperclip. So while I'm getting ready to share my screen and get my PowerPoint ready, can I get you to just, if you've got a pen and paper handy or anything that you want to use, how many uses are there in your ideas for a paperclip? Okay, I'll leave that with you while I just get ready to share my screen. Okay, and I'll just move myself out of the line of fire of the PowerPoint itself. And so, as I say, welcome to the session. It's called The Cutting Edge. I'm Judy Waite from the University of Winchester, where I teach creative writing. I'm also a children's fiction writer, and I've written fiction for picture books for very young readers, middle grade, all the way up to teenage, young adult fiction, and also academic works and academic publications related to creativity in education. The session is called The Cutting Edge. My research areas within the university, although I am actually a creative writing lecturer, I'm very interested in creativity generally and in the ways that we might be able to embed creative process within literacy, within education generally. And I particularly wanted to focus on these areas in respect of the recent announcements about the 50% cuts to arts that are being proposed, and really the challenge that that gives to all of us in terms of how we give our subjects that cutting edge, if you like, that gives it a validity within education, particularly higher education. So my focus then is on the value of process. I'm starting just asking the question of what is creativity, and I'm sure that if you've come along to this symposium, you have your own ideas and your own experiences. I'm taking something that is very, very well known here as my initial model, the Csikszentmihalyi idea of the 5 stages of creativity. And here he has identified preparation, so getting ready, collecting ideas, incubation, letting those ideas sort of mull around and settle, insight, or what is suddenly often called the aha moment, where it's suddenly, oh yeah, I know what I'm going to do. The consequent evaluation, where we're thinking, is the I know what I'm going to do actually worth doing? And then the elaboration, which is, if you like, the kind of moving into the actual project itself and getting on with the writing of that. Csikszentmihalyi is not the only voice in creative models of how creativity works. So I just did a very quick Google, just an example here, and you've got here how many different stages of creativity there might be. We've got 4 stages, we've got 7 steps of process, 5 stages, 6 stages, 8 stages. Who knows how many stages there are? But I think what we can probably agree is that there are stages, and they're not as linear as any of these sort of previously shown in the previous slide suggests, that it doesn't just move in this straightforward way. But I'm not going into the kind of the network in the mind aspects of creativity at the moment, but only to acknowledge that I'm not suggesting at all that it is this straightforward, one moves to another. There's a backwards and forwards thing throughout, which can be demonstrated through a kind of neuroscience which would identify how that process is actually working. But we can still identify that we know that there are processes, and if we're going to teach the subject and if we're going to embed it into education, we need to have some concept of what that might be and how we might utilize it within perhaps our own institutions or our own awareness, or what works with our own disciplines. At higher education, generally, I would say that creativity would work in terms of evolving through the stages and then reflecting on the process. So we've got the reflection, which will be a student account perhaps of the process that they went through, or a rationale, which is discussing the process in the context of theory and research and of aligning the work with other practitioners. And all of this is a collection, if you like, of process and the student understanding of how their processes are working within their own context and again within their own disciplines. If I move you back to creative writing, I've actually got a first year module which is called creativity and isn't particularly to do with writing, it is to do with process. But in order to assess this, we still have to have something written. So for this module, and because they are creative writing students, that something written will be a creative piece, and supported by samples of process. Samples of process can take any form, as long as the student is able to discuss those samples and show their awareness of what they were doing. So we're moving away from this idea of intuition, if you like, it just suddenly came to me, the idea came out of the sky, but actually showing what the processes were that the student went through and therefore how they impacted on the result of what they came up with in the creative piece. And this, for assessment purposes, is supported by a reflective essay, which discusses the process samples. So the process samples might be something like drawings of pin men being characters and annotated. It might be some very detailed piece of art. We can't actually assess the process because we can't say that the pin man is any less valuable than the very detailed piece of art. It might be as a different form, but in itself as creative process, it might be doing, the pin man might be doing a better job in terms of reaching the required outcome for the creative piece. So we can't assess the actual process, only the theory relating to the process. What might process look like though? In creative writing, again, it is quite common to consider creative process in this idea of gathering ideas. So we can see that going back to the highly idea of the getting ready, the preparation for the writing, and then the reading and the analysing of whatever is an early draft. Moving into that drafting process, which involves rewriting and reworking. Very often at HE, this would be workshopping, so it would be collaborative. It would be students discussing each other's work, critiquing it, and giving each other advice, as well as the tutor stepping in. And then that final editing phase, which again, in the Sixth Highly model, that would be the bit where you actually roll your sleeves up and get on with the work. Again, not hard set in stone that it works in that order, but as I said at the beginning, we need to have some kind of form in order to attach this to. So that is what is obvious, the visible aspects that we could apply to creative writing, or in fact, any project that's evolving. But I'm actually very interested in not what we can see, but what we can't see. I call this creative interventions when I use these techniques in my own teaching. And this might be things such as meditation, deepening the thought process before we reach the processes that I just talked about in the previous slide. Working with silence, letting ideas really collect and evolve, and enabling the space for that to happen. Psychogeography, a connection with environment, putting students perhaps out in the environment and responding to what is around them, either as a form again of a kind of walking meditation, or maybe some genuine connection with the environment that is going to actually add to their process and to the ideas that are forming. Pieces of free writing where they are not aware of their own processes at all, but just letting that stream of consciousness work, which is very much a Freudian technique of word association and ideas association, which I will come to a bit later. Mind mapping is the same thing. It is actually, I would call it, a conversation with your subconscious and your conscious, literally moving very quickly between the two places. Cut-ups, which again relies on Word association, again, something that has been used throughout art for many years, talking about the Surrealist movement, or William Burroughs, and even up to David Bowie, using cut-ups to create new ideas out of what is already existing. Ekphrasis, again, using imagery that already exists, or music and sound that already exists, and enabling that to interact with the creative process, and therefore taking students deeper into the whole experience. So when we experience the above, we can show connections between process and output, therefore demonstrating that process as a form of evidence. So I'm talking now about being able to evidence our process, because this seems to me one of the problems that is inherent within creative subjects within institutions. It is not that they're not working, it is just how do we show that they're working, and how do we show that this is concrete empirical evidence that we can draw from, that is repeatable, and that students have an idea of theory and can take away and repeat the practices and work on those outcomes. We're talking here also about connecting memories and intuition and emotions throughout the process. And I'm going to be talking in a moment about a researcher called KENNETT, who is in the field of neuroscience, who is of course able to show this very visible evidence through the work that he does. So this is actually just little bits of extracts from existing students about they're working with process and they're working with meditation. So this particular student visualizing a scene for writing and using the meditation practice in order to evolve that particular scene, and drawing here from Julia Cameron and discussing the value of silence related to creativity. The student using the free writing process that I discussed earlier to get rid of that critic that sits on our shoulder and says, oh, your idea isn't really good enough, and talking about how they found new depths when they use this process. And this is Peter Elbow, they're drawing from in terms of how using this natural free writing stream of consciousness, which again, as I said earlier, is a Freudian process that he actually used with shell-shocked soldiers during the war in order to access their sort of deep subconscious mind and their own experiences. This is now being reutilized within creative writing as a way of engaging with a deeper focus on process against product. This is a piece of my own process. It was part of my own PhD thesis, Mysterious Magics of Creative Writing. And in this, I'm showing the journey, if you like, of the process from going out on a walking meditation with my notebook, doing visuals, typing up some of the notes that I came upon as I experienced walking along the edge of a tidal river, and then using cut-ups to create a piece of writing, and showing therefore not that this is a brilliant piece of writing, but that how that whole process can come together from early notes into a cut-up activity that can be discussed. And so the meditation walk and the cut-ups can be discussed in terms of an integrity to process, and this is the product that comes out of it. I talked about YOED KENNETT earlier, and I think it's interesting to look at where things such as neuroscience might be on the subject of creativity. YOED KENNETT, I've put a link here to his session where he was talking about actually being able to map the word association. So the cut-ups that I talked about earlier form part of word association. And by mapping word association of subjects as part of a research project, he was able to show that more creative people were able to access, to go further in their brain, to journey further in order to associate different aspects of language. So if you take something like table and then put in chair and then put in dinner and then put in feast and then party, you've got a kind of logical sequence of word association. But those people who were able to be classified as highly creative were able to take that journey from table to chair to aeroplane to jungle to tiger to endangered species, making that journey still logical, but with a much further reach. So this neuroscience then is able to map out that experience. And one of the things that I want to actually look at is how we can bring the science, the technology of what we're doing within creative practice into our experiences of teaching and into how we are assessing, so that we can actually, as I was talking earlier, actually really give the science of the evidence in what we're doing. I'm looking here at Robin Nelson in his work Practices Research. He's talking about the difference between science and the creative experiential process. Science giving us hard facts, experiential processes giving us what he calls liquid knowing. And so what I'm talking about is trying to bring those two things closer together. Science isn't, in fact, always about hard facts, and our experiential processes are not always about just a liquid knowing. So what might we be able to meet in the middle? I'm going to go back to my paperclip challenge again, and I'm going to ask you, how many uses did you come up with for a paperclip? And this is actually part of an experiment that was taken place in the 1960s. Somebody called George Land, who was with also Beth Jarman, was putting together a creativity test, which was originally tried out on potential astronauts and scientists within NASA to assess their suitability for the roles that they would be taking on. And he then was so interested in the results that he actually did this project with children, starting them at age 5, again at age 10, again at age 15, and taking them through those 3 stages. There was a kind of genius level that had already been determined. And at genius level, at age 5, there were 98% who'd come up with inventive ways for uses of a paperclip. At age 10, it had gone down to 30%. At age 15, we had 12%. And he then also added adults into that mix with an average age of 31.2%. We're looking then at a sort of creativity crisis if we move towards adulthood in terms of what gets kind of taken out of us, and how we keep then that creative element into our teaching. So we're not taking the creativity out of our students, and we're still able to show that that works in terms of assessment and assignment. So this kind of interventions that I'm talking about can facilitate the learning of creativity alongside the measuring of skills. Process and product can become interchangeable. What is felt could be as integral as to what is thought. And if science methodologies no longer stand as the gold standard, then emotional responses that can contribute to our outcomes can be measured in the context of reflection in the practice, not just for fiction, not just for creative writing, but for all forms of creative process, regardless of the discipline, whether you are in maths, in engineering, in science, in history, in media, all the range of other subjects that we might be involved in can still take something from these processes. So that is my session. It's been very much a whistle-stop tour. I hope it's been interesting, and I would like to discuss that if anybody's interested. So I'm going to propose a discussion for Thursday on the 24th of June to see if there's anyone who's interested in talking about this further. So thank you very much for listening. I am just going to stop sharing my screen with you now. And just coming back to the main screen, once again, thank you. Hope that you get a lot from the whole symposium, and looking forward, hopefully, to chatting these ideas through with some of you. And take care.